you, Nori. Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, to our CDS Lab webinar series. We are starting a new topic this summer on water and access. And I'm very happy to invite our first speaker, Dr. Cheng, to give it the initial webinar. She's going to talk about co-design nature-based solution with communities for sustainable, resilient, and just water system. Dr. Cheng is an associate professor of landscape architecture and senior sustainable scientist at Arizona State University. She directs the Hydro GI Lab and co-develops green infrastructure design research and practice with stakeholders and communities for sustainable, resilient, and just urban water systems. Her climate justice design methods integrates hydrological model, field experiments, and spatial analysis in participatory transdisciplinary processes to measure landscape performance and social impacts for sustainable development. Dr. Cheng is a recipient of the Landscape Architecture Foundation 2020 Case Study Investigation Research Fellow, and currently she's serving on the National American Society of Landscape Architects, Environmental Justice Professional Practice Network, and Climate Action Committee. I would like to add that Cheng also co-organized this series of webinar, so we will see more on discussion about water and the challenge we're currently facing. Welcome, Cheng, and we're looking forward to an exciting talk.
Well, thank you very much, Cecilia, for a generous introduction. Do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, yeah, as introduced by Cecilia, today I will talk about co-design with nature-based solution with communities. But first of all, I'd like to make a land acknowledgement that where I'm in Tempe, Arizona is where all the Machipish peoples are. And I also want to acknowledge the Juneteenth Day and to celebrate the end of slavery, and I think combined with colonization of the land and slavery injustice in the system that still persists today. And so we still have a lot of work to do. And today I'm going to use my perspectives from the design. I see it's a combination, it's an integration between art and science. And it is applied science to really meaning to do a problem solving. And today I'm going to focus on urban water systems and on the sustainability that will cover, we talk about sustainability should have embracing all elements of environment, equity, and the economy. And also to acknowledge this sustainability system is in the interconnected social, ecological, and technological systems. And what are the main issues I will want to address today is the climate change impacts and the persistent systemic injustice in the society as the ecological and social drivers. And that really affects how we build a more sustainable environment. As we see now, we have biodiversity degradation, we have extreme weather influenced by climate change. Right now in Arizona, we have a couple of fires, and we have serious ones, and California has serious ones last year as well. And the extreme heat and drought and floods, those are continuing happening. We see every year, even more and more those events happened. And what that impacts is on our communities, and that relates to the vulnerability of the systems and the resilience of the system. And then how do we really make sure it is equitably addressed, and to really make sure our community is sustainable, resilient, and just. So my work has been involved with these three areas. As a landscape architect, nature-based solution is our kind of bread and butter and foundation of how we use ecological design to thinking about designing our environment. And my personal interest in environmental justice expanded to climate justice, and also how we can work with community to really solve all these complex issues. And I'm directing the hydrological lab, and our goal is to advance understanding of green infrastructure, both the process and the performance, especially in the desert cities, and then how we can promote those evidence-based design and education, and then to enhance resilience of the community. And we have partners from our local Maricopa County and also our ASU, and they're supported by multiple agents. So starting with urban waters, what are the issues? And from my interest in research, urban waters challenges in cities. It's either we have too much water or too less. So in Phoenix, we actually experience both. And it has been continued droughts and for the past 20 years. And this years, we see, again, really severe droughts. And many people may not think we have floods, but we do. And to look at the flooding data in the past 20 years, we see there are increasing number of records for flood events. And we see those yellow dots is the one that the precipitation actually exceeding the normal annual rainfall, which is about 8 inches per year. So we see in recent decades, Phoenix actually really experiencing extreme events. And in my work, we have been looking at how we can assess the urban flooding vulnerability and using SATS framework. As I mentioned, the social, ecological, technological systems. And then this paper we combined with the traditional kind of hazard studies about exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And then using this dimensions to identify the key indicators. And then we did a spatial analysis for 6 cities that is within urban resilience sustainable network cities that's funded by NSF. So the key point of using this framework is, usually in the hazard study, we may only look at social vulnerability, or we may only look at the hazard exposure. And but very last study really thinking about the intersections between these various systems. So we think using this framework can really highlight maybe some additional issues that we did not aware before. So the social systems may include whether the institution has the capacity, and the ecological vulnerability actually can include the ecosystem itself, their vulnerability, how to be more adaptive to climate change. And my other work also looking at the issues of urban flooding. So pluvial floods is specifically referring to the flooding that is happen in the cities when it's exceeding the capacity of the design storms. So those infrastructure we designed in the cities, and usually that's based on the past decades of climate pattern, and that's how we size the pipes and how we design the whole systems. But probably arguably that, under climate change, those events we are designing for, let's say, we design 2-year storm event, 10-year storm event, but maybe today that 10-year is not the same volume as it was, 10 years ago now. So in this chart, the red bar actually is the simulated design event that if we have climate change, then that precipitation accumulation will be much exceeding to what we are currently designing for. So that really indicates that our current urban infrastructure is really need to be rethinking about how we should design. And my other work have been using the SWOT, soil and water assessment tool, and to model the impacts from climate change, precipitation and temperature change, and how sensitive the watershed in this case is Charles River watershed, and under different climate scenarios, and where would that flooding hazard will sit down under climate change. And in addition, because I'm interested in using how green infrastructure can help to mitigate those flood impacts. So I'm also using the model to testing if we add a certain percentage of land using for detention, and how would that impact the flood hazard. And in this study, I found there are some potential to use green infrastructure. Just the detention alone in this case has already been able to reduce the hazard events. In this case, the long-term study simulation for 45 years, and before and after using detention, only 3% of land can help to reduce about 15 to 36 days of flooding. So I mentioned about nature-based solutions, but what are they? And since this is a relatively newer term, and it has been widely used, especially in the European context, and in Europe, they have been using this into their policy already. And I see more and more now in the US, and literature and stakeholders are starting to talk about nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions based on International Union for Conservation of Nature they are the action to protect, manage, restore natural or modified ecosystems that can address society challenges. And so those societal challenges are those anything we can think about for food, water, energy issues, and health, people well-being. And I think the nature-based solutions are almost equally the same meaning as green infrastructure that in the US we have been using for decades. And green infrastructure, in my work, in the landscape architecture, we define it as an interconnected network of natural and man-made spaces and elements that provide ecosystem functions and services. And I want to note it that EPA, for example, they will use green infrastructure this term to be a little bit more narrowly just for stormwater, non-point source pollution control. But in my work, I have been using more widely to refer to all the connected systems. And the example of the nature-based solution design and the performance, landscape performance is the one I helped to monitor our Orange Mall in the ASU. And this is the first project we got sites certificate for the gold for ASU. And also it is lead. The building, there's a pavilion is a lead planter. So this side, it was just like a cul-de-sac, totally it's asphalt, it's a normal street at the end of a street on campus. But this is near to our Memorial Union, is the center of the campus. And so it's actually a very important node on campus. So, and 3 years ago, the ASU renovated, redesigned this, and with a series of bioswales, and provide more shades, and you can see the kind of rain gardens here, and a lot of features like downspout disconnection from the roof, and just pour in a rain garden. And so I help to monitor the quantity and quality of this design. And this is the pattern of a stormwater design. And this is 2-acre site, but it's within a larger 18-acre drainage site. So we installed the water sampler features and to collect the water sample, but of course during the monsoon season, and in 2018-19 we were able to collect about 3 events. And for quality, we found more significant in the net phosphorus uptake and some nitrogen reduction. And for quantity, we use a soil moisture sensor, and there's a water level meter. And plus, we also measure the plant's transpiration and to see. And interestingly, is not only the bioswales has the capacity to hold those storm events, and the plants also play the important role. So together, even though this rain garden was designed for 10-year storm event, but because of the plants and soil together, we were able to reach about 25-year capacity. So that's really the power of nature-based solutions. And the additional feature like collecting condensation water from the buildings, and this can be stored supposedly to compensate irrigation. And we also measure the heat, to compare if it was under asphalt, no shade, and compare that was like, before construction was the situation like that. And now after is under the shade, this pond walk, and it can be up to 24 Fahrenheit degrees or 13 degrees Celsius difference. And but I noted that the moderate thermal comfort, this mean radiant temperature is actually, it's not air temperature, is the combination of the humidity, the wind, and actually it's relative humidity. So it's how people actually feel the heat. So this is better for measure for thermal comfort. And then we also conduct social impacts, like how people use the space, and a lot of landscapes architecture literature already show that environmental psychology, right? How access to nature and green space can help to reduce stress and help to restore your attention. And so we observe, how many students, how many people using the space, and for how long, and really to see the effectiveness of this space to provide those health benefits. And of course, there are education outreach, social benefits from this design. And we had many, we have the Paideia School. They were so excited to see this case, and they want to apply on their campus. And then we have Maricopa County also want to do that on their campus, which actually they are all doing right now. So I mentioned about climate justice, and I want to explain more. And it has to go back, trace back to the systemic vulnerability that was from the environmental justice literature. And in this work, the sociologist Ultrabeck has written this book about risk society, and really saying that the society actually constructed risk, make some populations are more vulnerable to certain hazards and circumstances, whether it's chronic or abrupt risks, because of all the social, economic, and systems that are installed in the society. So there is a progression of systemic vulnerability and how this socially constructed risks can be amplified or can be attenuated, depends on how we could manage this. And that will certainly have impacts on the social and ecological communities. And environmental justice in the US, in the early days, have been looking at the hazard exposure and toxic waste facilities and in proximity to the minority neighborhoods. So many studies will refer to this first systemic research from this book, this document, and really highlight those toxic waste facilities close to the red part is the minority neighborhoods. And 20 years later, so that was done in 1987. And 20 years later, my postdoc advisor, Dr. Paul Mohai, and his team conducted another one, using the similar methods. And this time they found out, the pattern still exists, but the minority, though, adding the Hispanic as one of the minority groups, and also being in the environmental justice groups. And my work, when I was in PhD, involved with the Boston Urban Ecological Project, and we work with the stakeholders and we look at different scenarios, how the cities could grow. And then this study, we actually look at the, how equitably we can make, the tree planting a more equitable policy. As at that time, Boston having those 100,000 trees planting policy. So we use this Gini index as index for green equity, and looking at those 4 different growth scenarios that we develop with stakeholders, and then to associate that with low-income neighborhood and find which scenarios actually has a better equitable distribution. So my interest on urban flooding hazards and looking at the communities are experiencing climate change associated hazards, and those systemic injustice persist. So who suffers most from those hazard events? And then when we talk about community resilience, who determines and who benefits? And so looking at Katrina, I think many people say that was probably can be said as climate justice case in the US. And we see that even 15 years after Katrina, many neighborhood, many community members still did not come back, and the neighborhood still have not totally rebuilt. And so I'm curious about whether this climate justice has the pattern over the United States. So in this study, I combined with social, ecological, technological vulnerability, and looking at across 48 states of American cities and which ones has climate justice implications. And the social vulnerability, I used the Susan Carter's social vulnerability index. So their work has identified 32 indicators, all from the publicly accessible data, and then use statistical analysis to combine and with the social vulnerability index. And then I look at also what are the climate change associated hazards, and those are droughts, floods, heavy precipitation, cold and winter events, and tropical hurricane, etc. So, during Katrina and for after that 10 years, this study was looking at really looking at whether there's any trends, and also in that 10 years, what are the economic cost for the communities. And we can see that in general, actually, they are increasing of damages, but those big events, interesting, probably did not totally convert into this data set yet. And then you can also imagine in the past couple years, they will have already more events happen. So I think this graph will probably change. But during that time, I combined those data set, and this is the social vulnerability for the US, and red is the most vulnerable. And the ecological, that means and how many numbers of hazards events happened, and the below is the hotspot analysis. And then technological vulnerability, this I refer to whether the county has green infrastructure available. So green infrastructure, again, my study has proven it can help to mitigate the floods. So if your county has green infrastructure like forests and open space, that can really help to mitigate. But if there is a county lack of green infrastructure, then you've got more vulnerability. That's what I meant by technological vulnerability. So combine those three together, and then we're looking at which cities, of course, the US are considered as climate justice hotspots, and probably not surprisingly, some big cities can be highlighted. But I will pay attention actually on a more smaller and rural communities, because those communities usually have less resources to actually cope with climate change impacts. So the same kind of framework I applied to the spatial analysis on the Huron River watershed. And then in the Huron watershed, there are 3 cities that identified as climate justice hotspots, Wilson, Ann Arbor, and Ypsilanti. And they also have less green infrastructure to be really vulnerable to climate change. But now I'm adding, how to work with community, because all this previous study are all quantitative data, and you look at from 30,000 feet above, spatial analysis. But then how do you actually know the community resilience is the capacity, ability to cope? And that capacity, does that mean you can totally measure by the quantitative values? So even people's perception, how they perceive, and that can impact how they behave, right? How they would take actions. So I did a further study to do the survey in the Huron River watershed, and using the map I just showed, and to see whether people change their perception if they know their risks. So I have like climate justice cities and the non-climate justice groups for their comparison of their perception. And this study found, and for perceived exposure, the climate justice group actually has less perceived exposure. So that's actually not the hypothesis we were originally think. And then for perceived sensitivity, whether they consider how vulnerable they are. And this time, climate justice group seems has more perceived sensitivity. And then whether the climate justice group feel more prepared or feel actually less prepared to do so for future events. And actually not only the climate justice group thinks they have less perceived adaptive capacity, but also non-climate justice groups. So this study actually pointed out there is a gap in risk communication. So people who perceive their risk, they can be different than what actually the scientific or quantitative exposure actually shows. And so since this is the projected vulnerability, but how the residents actually perceive the risk, that can have a different attitude and behavior, which will add to the impediment for promoting any planning and design resources and actions for climate change. So all my research really trying to look at the climate change impacts on urban flooding and how the community has the capacity, how resilient they are to respond to cope, and whether this has just outcomes. But the outcomes is not the only component I'm interested, but also the procedures, because how community respond and then how they react to those different interventions can actually affect their sustainability of the community. So now the next session, I'm talking about how we co-design with communities. So I'm going to use my teaching as examples, because all my studios, we all work with communities on addressing various issues. So in this case, we work with Paideia academies. And this is a charter school in South Phoenix. And this South Phoenix has historically being segregated by zoning, zoning practices. So it is a systemic injustice, systemic racism, structural racism that was in place, and to become what we see Phoenix, how it urban developed today. And so that's also kind of explain why Paideia Academy are mostly minority group students. And they are situated in South Phoenix. It is less tree canopy, and sometimes they are more industrial and land uses around them. And so this, during like today is an extremely hot day, right? And you will see this neighborhood experience a more extreme heat event. But in addition, they also have flooding issues on campus. And so our team has worked on, looking at, site analysis, whether it's drainage pattern, circulation, vegetation, and how students are using the site. And then we design a process to engage with community. So both students, teachers, and parents, and came together. The first time we went, we simply want to listen from the community what they want to redesign their campus. And so we had survey, we had 3 different activities, and to really understand their needs. And then we took those information and back to the studio, and then work with the school to co-design the different scenarios. And so those goals are actually matching with the principle of Paideia Academy's goals. So that's they want the students to have heart, spirits, and whole body. So we develop those scenarios and based on their inputs, and then this design, we especially want to address stormwater management. So looking at all this low impact development design, and then how that integrated into the landscape. And we create all these different designs, and then to also kind of measure the performance, how much the tree canopies we can increase, and how much carbon that we may sequester, etc. So how this design can really achieve the goals and benefits that matches Paideia's goals. And this project, we won the EPA's the Campus Rainwater Challenge at 2nd place. And also for students, they in the Arizona chapter, American Society of Landscape Architects, the Students Community Service Award. And I want to mention that actually this project, the Paideia it's part of a larger kind of research group that Jenny Vamos has been working with Paideia to set up and collaborate with social scientists and natural scientists to look at how we can measure the outdoor play learning environments and to be more sustainable and more healthy for the community. So for example, we have air quality monitors on the roof, and the design actually is being implemented. And because this is part of the scope that they want to also measure, right? Using this nature-based solution and natural play, how can that improve the students' learning and the health of the community? So one thing that's already implemented is a community garden. And that was before and after. And we already see a lot of engagement with the teachers and students. And now there's under construction for the rest of the campus. And my lab is going to install instrument to measure the water quantity and to measure the landscape performance over time. Quickly, I want to mention the last case studies for Hawaii. And learning from Hawaii, it's dear to me, and it is opening really my eyes when I started working with Hawaii in 2017. 16, we had this chance of actually two studios, and each studio is 1 year long. So we were able to really have a deeper understanding of a place and really do something more meaningful. And in the first year, actually, it's really the time to build a relationship with the stakeholders and communities, but also really just to understand what this place is. So Hawaii has very unique history, and native Hawaiians have their really sophisticated way of managing water. and it's all watershed based. They call a Hubua system. So, each community, they only use the water in their own watershed, and they don't waste any water. And from the upstream to downstream, upstream is preserving water, water quality, and then there's a taro field and agriculture, and the downstream is a fish pond. So they all kind of self-sustain within the community. However, this kind of sustainability of the watershed system kind of changed when the colonization process happened, when the capitalism, start growing the takeover to grow pineapples and other crops that is for exports and profit. And then there's tourism coming in, and this is the students done this analysis in the patterns over time, how it was used to be able to have self-sufficiency, but now in Hawaii, 90% of food is imported. And it's also the fish ponds was in the time of the rapid urban development, it was even discontinued, but now people are trying to restore. And the native Hawaiian population is also declining, and there's more hazard exposure, etc. And while in the meantime, the tourism investment coming in and really change the place. And for this Alawai watershed, there is this serious issues on the water quality, especially, and in addition to the Hawaii, Honolulu has already been multi-hazards to hurricanes and droughts and floods. So how can we use design combined to resolve all these complex issues? So our students develop this idea of waterhoods, and this is really the key results, and really thinking about from the traditional indigenous concept of managing watershed, can we use that concept to looking at our neighborhoods as waterhood? How can we connect our community by water? Thinking about maybe it's a drainage pattern, maybe it's connected to the water systems. And there are a couple of strategies, like a removable, retractable, the walls, in case of flood comes, because the issue is flood. The Army Corps engineer, they proposed to build a 5 feet high wall along this canal, which this is where this is the downtown, and it's very it's touristy, so nobody wants to have a 5 feet high wall there. So we designed the retractable ones, and then other strategy to make the golf course as wetlands, so we can accommodate more floods. However, we saw the news over time that people actually try to stop Alawai project that was proposed by Army Corps engineers, and in recent cases there are more protests about a park in the neighborhoods that is, they are afraid of gentrification. That's not what a native community wants. And then there's telescope construction. They want to build on the native Hawaiian sacred site. So there are a couple, issues that would, really highlight the process is actually matters more than the products. So okay, so in this studio, we are looking at the redesign the park. And they really redesign these processes because the process really matters more. And so the first is we still take students to understand the place. We do mapping, we do the literature analysis, but the more importantly is we learn from the community. So we do a lot of the listening from the communities. And then in the second time, 2018-19, in this park, we are able to have this opportunity to actually do some community engagement exercise. So we designed the process. The first time we went in, we don't bring any ideas, design ideas. We really just want to listen from the community. And that kind of proven it's very important to do that. So you want to make community feel that they were being heard and not being told what to do. And so we learned from community. The second time we went and took the ideas, and then the next time we came back, we had this we call the pop-up design workshops. So instead of the community coming to one central public space, we actually went to different public spaces like a library, the coffee shop, grocery store, their favorite the ice shop, and the park. So we bring the design to the community to get feedback. And then again, we bring those comments back, and then to create the kind of final proposal for them for this studio. But the most importantly is we actually design, we document the process, and gave them these toolkits of how to conduct this participatory co-design process. And because this is, some residents actually came to me and say, well, this is really refreshing. They never experienced this kind of engagement process before. And they also, reflect that, it's really helpful, for us, especially the first time we don't bring any design ideas. So really that showed us we are humble to learn from the community and to really want to have meaningful engagement in this process. Because in the conventional way of community engagement, you just in the public meeting, in the city hall, 3 o'clock in the morning, and only certain people can go. And usually, it's only like announcement of the design rather than really truly engage and listen to what the community wants. And so there's some examples of how nature-based solutions are applied to this park redesign, and really looking at how it can accommodate the climate change and different storm events over time, how this park can be more adaptive. And there's just some vignettes, and those really just about communicating ideas. And this case really helped to learn a couple of things. One is we should connect the community before we collaborate. And we should have conversations early on and often in this process. And then finally, it's also a very important point is we have to respect the community. And they have this word, hana in Hawaiian. That means we all have the duty to show grace and leave the land better than we found it. And as this native Hawaiian Aulani Wilhelm said, we are ancestors in the making. So what kind of ancestors do we want to be? And I want to acknowledge, my co-workers and students and partners and sponsors who were all involved in these studios. And I want to mention, this is an extension project where we work with University of Hawaii and the Manoa Heritage Center and got this fund from NOAA to do this continued watershed education training, and this ties to K-12 teachers. So we had 2 cohorts. The second cohort is doing right now, and really trying to the STEM, in addition to science, technology, and environment, that double S is a social science and a sense of community. So a sense of place. So this is really rethinking about our education and how we can make a better community design over time. So in conclude that what I have been using these 3 concepts integrated into my research and teaching. And if you think about water, there should be no waste of any water in any drop. So there should be one water system that we should think about. And this sustainability should all think about environment, equity, and economy all together. And there is in the interconnected social, ecological, technological systems. And finally, I often talk about, the opportunities right now. We have a lot of crises. It's COVID, pandemics, climate change, and but how can we think about using those crises as opportunities? And when we need to rebuild, can we build better? So can we use our knowledge and skill sets and work with community to really ensure that we can go from the unsustainable state to a more sustainable state? So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward for the discussion.
Thank you, Ching-Wan. We will open the floor for questions. I think David has a question.
Yeah, my first question is how do you balance the need for living space in cities and the need for green infrastructure to protect from the floods?
Well, that's a great question. It's always that's a challenge. Right now, there is a concept or as a practice about sponge city. So basically, it's really think about how every drop in every space can be utilized. So it can be the roof, it can be the balcony, it can be the pavement, can be porous, and it can be underground systems. So there's no single solution. The nature-based solution of green infrastructure is a systemic system. And so in order to really address, and also we also should understand there also will be a limit of what the cities can actually totally observe the water, depends on the storm events. So there, monsoon season here, sometimes, we can drop like half of the years of rainfall in one day, right? And that our system just cannot hold it. So now it's actually, we also need to acknowledge that the technology alone cannot really solve all the issues. So there's also mindset shift need to happen too. You think about how, ancient, how we live with water, how we can live with nature. We understand the nature pattern, we respect, and we live accordingly. And so in the Southeast Asia, for example, right, they will build their houses just above ground, or they can still function when they flood. And that's the true resilience. And I think our cities also need to think about, it's okay to flood too. Of course, that should be under the situation that would not cost any causality and the extensive damage. So that means when we design, it has to be flexible, and the people also need to have a flexible mindset.
Thank you.
I have a quick question before we jump to Jorge's. Cheng, when you mentioned about like engaging the community, however, funding this will be usually ended up towards, for example, the government, the agencies will have to fund this kind of project. How do you get the buy-in from whoever can make the decisions that we're going to implement this?
Well, the best way is to involve them early. That's why we always say you don't start a project. You engage with them from the beginning, so the buy-in can start early already. It's harder when that's why we saw the worst cases is when you already spend 100 million to design something and the community doesn't want to have it, right? So that's why we emphasize process is more important, is so important. So in this case, for Paideia, for example, they already have a lot of funding to do the campus redesign. But actually, they realized after we gave them the idea, they actually hire consultant to do all the process, and they realized, well, there's not enough of money to do all the things that we designed for. So they have to cut back some, or we also try to do fundraising for them. So there's multiple ways. We also try to do get fundings from other sources. So there has to be multiple kind of venue. But again, the buying is from even before the project starts.
Okay, thank you. So the idea is to engage all your stakeholders early on at the project.
Yeah.
I think Jorge, I think we have probably one last question. Jorge, you would like to ask?
Yes, please. It was an incredible conference. I want to know about urban agriculture. One of the ideas that I was thinking that can change society is urban agriculture. Can we use that to develop cities?
Yes, yes. There are many efforts doing in a lot of cities. Baltimore, Detroit, Phoenix, we also have. I think urban agriculture, the scale can be small or big, and that really depends. So I mean, it really depends on how what community wants, how the city wants to manage, and certainly you will need people to manage it in order to sustain it. So again, the buy-in also important, even you want to do urban agriculture. And then if you're involved with the city's resources like water, etc., then you also need to work with the city. So again, there's a lot of initiative going on. If you need more information, I can send you something.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we're at time. Thank you, Cheng-Wen, for the wonderful talk. We learned a lot from all these processes. I think you probably will be very much interested involved in the stakeholder engagement session later on. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar on the national holiday, and happy Juneteenth Day. And wish you to see you guys in 2 weeks, our next speaker. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.